Hello, guys and gals, lords and ladies, saints and sinners of every kind. Welcome to Rise Up Jerusalem, your Catholic podcast for teens. I'm your host, Connor McLaughlin, and I have a confession to make. Today is the day when I'm finally going to cave and talk about Star Wars, because I feel like every single person on all of the internet is talking about Star Wars, so I feel like I have to as well. It's kind of a thing. Not only that, but I love Star Wars. I have probably all of the extended, well, I don't have all of them, but I have most of the expanded universe books, except for now they're no longer canon, so it really doesn't matter. But I can still talk to you for hours about Han Solo's daughter and son and all the great connections there, and it's beautiful. I love Star Wars. So I'm going to talk about Star Wars today because I want to talk about Star Wars. But this isn't like a nerd podcast, so I can't just talk about Star Wars. And so instead, I am going to talk about a very fun topic. A lot of people consider it to be really confusing in a way, but it's really not all that bad. We're going to talk about the just war theory and the relation it has to Star Wars. So basically, we're going to look at the rebellion and see if the rebels actually have a good case for fighting against the Empire. Now, you're probably like, of course they do. But it kind of does get muddy at some places with the just war theory, whether they are right or they aren't right. So if you haven't heard of the just war theory, it's mostly espoused in the Catechism in paragraph 2309. It has a couple things. Well, I'm just going to read it right up. It says that the strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force requires rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. At the same time, all four of these conditions must be met. All right? So here are the four conditions. Number one, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nations or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. There must be serious prospects of success. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. These are the traditional elements enumerated in what is called the just war doctrine. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. Okay, so let's look at each one of these different conditions. And it says that because a war is so grave and it's such a big deal, all of these conditions have to be met at the same time. All of them have to be met for it to be considered a just war. So, firstly, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. So, looking at the empire, is what they are doing going to cause effects that are lasting, grave, and certain? Well, as if you want to look at anything that they have done, where you can say, yeah, it has been lasting, grave, and certain. They blew up Alderaan. But even before that, the rebellion had been fighting against the Empire for long before Alderaan had began. I mean, the rebellion officially started like as soon as Episode 3 happened, and they kicked Palpatine, decided to destroy all the Jedi, all but, Yoda and Obi-Wan escaped, but that's beside the point. And Bail Organa started doing, behind the scenes work, trying to make everything better, try to knock out Emperor Palpatine. Now again, though, lasting, grave, and certain, that can be considered the complete destruction of a peace force, like the Jedi. That can be considered damage inflicted that is lasting, grave, and certain. So the damage inflicted by the aggressors are pretty lasting and grave. They killed all of the Jedi, an entire peace force. So that is a pretty lasting and grave matter. It's basically was mass genocide. Now the second one, all other means of putting an end to this have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. So let's think, would any of these things actually work? Would they be practical or effective at all? Well, Emperor Palpatine had a clone army, and then of course after the clone army he stopped having a clone army, had a normal stormtrooper army. I think we can agree that yeah, any kind of action like that would have been impractical or ineffective to starting peace. Because if you just start doing trade, it would just start eliciting a fight. If you started doing economic sanctions, it would just start even more of a fight. Invasion of troops onto certain planets, or enforcing economic sanctions, or if, for example, a blockade, they would just bust through the blockade, and that would start an even bigger fight. So they are impractical and ineffective. They're not going to work. Now, the third one, there must be serious prospects of success. Now, this doesn't mean that there has to be a complete guarantee of success. I mean, any number of small forces can beat a large army. There just has to be some sort of a serious prospect. There has to be a pretty good chance that we can succeed. Now, do the rebels have a pretty good chance it can succeed? You might think, well, not really, because they are doing it. However, the way that they're fighting is really a version of guerrilla warfare. So what they're doing very small attacks onto the Empire, just trying to knock them off a little bit at a time, little bit at a time. At least that's what they're doing until the Death Star comes into effect, right? And the Death Star is really important. And the last one is that the use of arms must not produce evil, and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. So the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders greater than the evil to be eliminated. Now, what this is really talking about is weapons of mass destruction, because it's a really large part with that. Because with these things, nations can use extremely excessive destructive force to stop an aggressor. And this results in way more casualties than would have occurred if the aggressor had just been allowed to go. So what you have to do is you can't destroy more, you can't have a massive destruction that will kill more people than, it will stop the war, but it will kill more people than if the person had just been allowed to go for it. Now, this really plays into effect with the destruction of the Death Star, because on the Death Star are about 1,148,309 people. So there are a lot of people. So what is the number of people who would have been killed had the Empire been allowed to run its course? Well, is it over 1 million? I'm going to say yes, because a population of a planet alone, for example, Alderaan, a planet similar to that type of scale, a middle class, not very super wealthy planet, but kind of like a higher to middle class planet, had billions upon billions of people living on it. So it's either 1 million or 1 billion. Obviously, the choice is clear. It's okay to destroy the Death Star. So it's okay if we go to war. All the conditions are met at the same time. However, while they're at war, Catechism states ways that war needs to be conducted. One of the big things the Catechism talks about in regards to immoral actions during war is that non-combatants, wounded soldiers, and prisoners must be respected and treated humanely. So if somebody has a prisoner, you have to treat him properly. All right? In the same way, actions deliberately contrary to the law of nations are crimes, as are the orders that command such nations. Blind obedience does not suffice to excuse those who carry them out. Thus, the extermination of a people, nation, or ethnic minority must be condemned as a mortal sin. One is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide. Again, the Death Star blew up a planet with billions of people on it. So what's going on is, by destroying Alderaan, the Empire really broke the moral code of how they were supposed to fight during war. Now, some people have pointed out that it isn't a real war because it's more of an rebellion, so it's more of like an insurgency or a rebellious group. It's not exactly a war, but it is still a fight between two different groups. So the rules still really do apply in that. Now here's where it gets a little bit sticky for the Republic. It says that every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a crime against God. So every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants. That sounds like Luke blowing up the Death Star. And you can say, once again, Alderaan, but it does sound like Luke blowing up the Death Star. Does Luke have the ability, is he allowed to say, yeah, we can blow up the Death Star? Is he having that complete moral, oh yeah, well, blindness, this is what I'm being told to do thing, just like we just talked about? Is he committing the mass genocide? I mean, 1 million people is nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, Alderaan did have billions, but 1 million people on the Death Star, you're still killing 1 million people. And the Death Star destruction has an even greater effect. Matt Pat on the YouTube channel Film Theory did an awesome episode recently on the economics of blowing up the Death Star, how it would have economic downfall and really start to have a recession among the entire galaxy. So it gets to an even bigger thing. Not only is it a mass genocide, it's going to have a widespread effect in the economy because of reasons and such and things. And if you really want to know about it, watch this episode. It's an absolutely awesome episode, seriously. It's really good. I highly enjoy it and recommend it. Now, what you have to get into is what's called the rule of double effect. Okay, now the rule of double effect is something that Thomas Aquinas first did in Summa Theologica, and it's a set of criteria for determining whether a action is morally justifiable. So a couple things to it is the nature of the act is itself good or at least morally neutral. So is the nature of blowing up the Death Star good or is it neutral? Well, the action of itself is a destruction of something. Okay, so it's because of the action, and the intent is, yes, blowing it up and destroying it and killing the people on board. But that's the effect. The action is sending a proton torpedo down into a air vent. The act is morally neutral. The agent, in this case Luke Skywalker, intends the good effect and not the bad, either as a means to the good or as an end itself. Now this is pretty much meaning that he wants the good effect and not what the bad. He doesn't want to do it because it will kill people. He wants to do it because it will kill people if he doesn't do it. Now this is fine because he's intending the good effect as a means to the good. So he's intending it to do it because it will save people. And thirdly, the good effect outweighs the bad effect in circumstances sufficiently grave to justify causing the bad effect, and the agent exercises due diligence to minimize the harm. Again, the good effect is outweighing the bad effect. The good effect is stopping a Death Star. Bad effect is destruction of millions of people and a recession of the economy across the galaxy. Does the destruction of the Death Star to protect the galaxy outweigh the bad effect of the actual destruction of the Death Star in the circumstances grave enough to justify causing the destruction of the Death Star? I think we can all agree yes. The idea of having a super weapon of mass destruction like that and destroying it completely outweighs the effect of the destruction of it and the destruction of a couple million people. So what have we determined? Well, we've determined that Luke Skywalker is completely fine in shooting that proton torpedo. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Now, was the Empire right in waging war? No. Really what's going on is the rebellion is totally fine. Absolutely nothing is wrong with it. Just war theory has been explained to thee, and I gotta talk about Star Wars. So it's a happy day. So that ends the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was very, very fun to talk about Star Wars because it's my other love after Jesus. It sounded really nerdy. I feel really sad now. I feel just nerdy. Do I have a problem? I don't think I have a problem. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Do not forget, we now have a Twitter account. So if you have Twitter, follow us on Twitter or Google Plus if you really want to. I don't know. If you're really desperate. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'm Connor McLaughlin, and as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, rise up and live. Rise up and live.